In the winter of 1883, in the hills of southern Tennessee, a small town vanished from the maps. No disaster was recorded, no epidemic, no war. Yet in a matter of weeks, the townspeople were gone, their homes left with doors unlocked, lamps still burning, food set upon the table. All that remained was a single house, standing at the edge of a river that no longer exists. The house of Eliza Harrow. To the living, she was known as a widow, a quiet woman who wore black from the day her husband died in the mines until the day they laid her in the ground. But the ground did not keep her, and the story that followed became one of the most quietly erased chapters in Tennessee's history. Her name was removed from census rolls, church records were burned, the house was condemned and eventually buried under what is now forest land. Yet the evidence, what little escaped destruction, suggests something happened there that the town could never explain. Because years later, when federal surveyors uncovered the remains of the settlement, they found something impossible. A cellar sealed from the inside. And in that cellar, a chair. A chair that was still warm to the touch. That was where this story began again. A story the local authorities dismissed as folklore. A story that neighbours refused to tell, except in hushed tones when the air grew cold enough that their breath turned white, even indoors. For nearly a century, rumours of the widow haunted the valley. A woman said to walk at dusk, her steps soft as ash, her voice carrying through the trees long after the wind stopped. What we've uncovered are the surviving fragments, the official records that remain, the journal of the town's physician, the sheriff's accounts, and one recording that should never have existed in 1883. Together they form a record that was never meant to be seen, and if you're watching this now, you are among the first to hear it told in full. This is the documented history of Eliza Harrow, the widow who, according to every measurable law of nature, should have died, but didn't. A pause. What follows is every known account, chronological, unembellished, taken directly from written testimony and physical evidence. Whether you believe in what she became is not the point. The point is that every name attached to her story, every sheriff, every undertaker, every witness met the same end. They disappeared. Some left behind letters, some left behind stains on their floors, but not one left behind a body. So before we begin, remember this. Everything you're about to hear was once considered real enough to be removed from record, and somewhere in Tennessee where the map folds over an unmarked valley, that house is still there, waiting. The town of Briar Hollow sat in a fold of the Tennessee hills, 37 homes, one church, one school, and a mining office that served as its heartbeat. By the time winter came in 1883, the mines had thinned. Families were leaving, one wagon at a time. Those who stayed behind said the hills had gone quiet. Even the river had slowed, as if the land itself were holding its breath. In a narrow house at the end of a dirt lane lived Eliza Harrow, a woman of 35 who, according to census records, had been married only once. Her husband, Samuel, died in a collapse inside the number 4 shaft, leaving her a widow before her 30th birthday. After his burial, she stopped attending church. She spoke less. She was seen sweeping her porch each morning at sunrise and lighting her lamps each night at exactly 7. Neighbours wrote that her home never went dark. Even during shortages, she burned oil until morning. Some believed it was grief. Others said she feared what might come if she let the flame go out. The local sheriff's journal, dated February 1883, contains the first official mention of her name after Samuel's death. House remains lit at all hours. Several reports of noises. Child says he saw a figure in her window. No investigation followed. In those years, such things were chalked up to imagination or gossip. Yet 2 weeks later, the sheriff's deputy, Jacob Oakes, filed his own note. Blue light seen in upper window. House hums like a throat about to speak. That single sentence would be the last record written in Oakes's hand. He vanished the following month. What makes these early accounts remarkable is not their language, but their consistency. Multiple sources, separated by miles and time, describe the same light, a pale glow moving behind the glass when no lamp was lit inside. Farmers said their animals grew uneasy near the Harrow property. Dogs refused to approach the gate. A horse collapsed at the edge of the road one evening, its eyes wide as if it had seen something move across the yard. Those same reports described the air around the house as close, too still, as though a storm was waiting but never came. By March, the town had begun avoiding the Harrow home altogether. Yet one man, a postman named Turner, continued to deliver her mail. In his testimony, written much later, he said, "She answered the door before I knocked. She looked through me like she was waiting for another man to stand there." Turner also noted that her hand was warm. He emphasized that twice. Warm. When asked what that meant, he replied only, "It had been snowing for 3 days." On April 2nd, the sound of a crash woke the neighbors. They found her front door ajar and the lanterns inside still burning. Eliza was discovered at the base of her staircase. Her neck was broken. The coroner signed the papers the next morning. Cause of death, accidental fall. She was buried 3 days later in the churchyard beside her husband, under a headstone carved with a single word. Harrow. There are photographs of that funeral. In the Tay. Background of one, a thin figure stands by the gate, partly obscured by the glare of the sun. No one at the funeral recalled seeing her there in person. The undertaker, Thomas Riggs, later wrote, "Her body was heavy, as if filled with water. When we placed her in the coffin, the air turned warm. By morning the room still smelled of oil and salt." That note was filed and forgotten like the others. For 2 days after her burial, the town remained quiet. Then, on the third night, a glow appeared in the window of her house. Some said it was a prank. Others refused to look. Those who did swore they saw a figure sitting in her rocking chair, the same chair she had kept near the fire, the same chair that years later would be found in the cellar, still warm. Within a week, the lights grew brighter. The house began to hum again. The sheriff, already stretched thin from other disappearances, recorded one last entry. "If anyone else dies, the town will empty." That entry was dated April 19th, 1883. 2 days later, a child went missing from a house less than 100 yards away. Witnesses claimed they heard humming near the Harrow property that same evening, a low, steady tune no one recognized. The child was never found, and when the townspeople gathered to search the widow's home, they found every lamp burning, but no trace of the woman who had been buried less than a week before. Pause. Faint creak of a chair. The town of Briar Hollow would exist for only one more season. What happened next is known today as the first recorded case of an entire Tennessee settlement disappearing without trace. But to understand what followed, you must first understand the night they opened her door. Long pause. This is where the record begins to change. In the week that followed the child's disappearance, Briar Hollow began to behave like a town waiting for instruction. Men carried rifles to their fields. Mothers locked their doors before the sun went down. The sheriff's deputy, Thomas Avery, took up watch along the main road each night, claiming he saw shapes moving against the far ridge. At first, no one connected these events to the widow's home. Then the lights appeared again. Witness accounts differ on the colour. Some said white, others said blue, but all agree they came from the second-floor window, the same room where she had died. On certain nights, the light flickered in a rhythm, as if answering something beyond the hills. From the surviving reports, it seems the sound came first, a low hum, like a bow drawn across a glass edge, growing louder as the night deepened. Dogs howled, chickens broke their roosts. The lamp flames inside neighbouring houses shook as though touched by a passing train. Avery, the deputy, went to investigate. He recorded his intentions in the sheriff's logbook before he left. If lights still present, I'll knock. If no answer, I'll return by dawn. He never returned. The sheriff found Avery's horse the next morning, tied to a fence post. Its reins were still looped, the saddle dry despite the night's rain. Tracks led halfway up the Harrow path, then stopped, as if the ground itself had refused to remember his steps. In the same entry, the sheriff wrote, "Lantern inside appears to move by itself." These words mark the last official investigation into the Harrow property until 1931. For the families who remained, the lights became a presence to be endured. Children were told to look away from that side of the valley. If a glow appeared in their window, they were to close their eyes and recite Psalm 23 until it faded. Some nights, the glow would last only minutes. Other times it lingered until dawn, pulsing gently against the horizon. There were attempts to explain it: swamp gas, reflections from miners' lamps, even lightning trapped by iron veins beneath the soil. But none of these theories accounted for the way the light moved. Witnesses said it travelled through the house, down the stairs, across the hall, and that sometimes, just before it vanished, it would pause near the front door, as though waiting for someone to open it. By midsummer, only 12 families remained in Briar Hollow. In August, a travelling merchant named Gideon Pike passed through the valley. His route notes, found in a private collection decades later, describe what he saw. At dusk, a glow on the hill, blue as a flame seen through ice. Heard humming, low and even, thought it a wind, until it followed me down the road. Pike left the county the next morning without selling a thing. In the weeks that followed, the last families packed their belongings and left. They gave no notice. Their houses stood half full, beds unmade, tables set, kettles left to rust. When the surveyors arrived in 1904, they found only one house intact, the Harrow residence. Its windows were unbroken, the interior untouched by weather. On the mantelpiece sat a single unlit candle, and on the wall above the hearth hung a photograph of a man and woman. The woman's face was clear, her eyes fixed on the lens. The man's, however, had faded to a pale blur, as though erased from within the print. Experts would later claim the photograph had deteriorated unevenly due to moisture, but one archivist, before sealing the collection, made a note in pencil on the reverse side. Photo reacts to heat. Image of man darkens when held near flame. The report ends there. No further mention of the Harrow light appears in state records after that year. Yet oral accounts continued. Hunters in the 1920s described seeing the same glow drifting above the valley floor, silent and steady, even in thick fog. Some said it moved as if guided by invisible walls. Others claimed it stopped to watch them. And one story, repeated by several witnesses over decades, tells of a woman standing by the old fence line, her face hidden beneath a black veil holding what appeared to be a lantern without a flame. The light, they said, came from her eyes. Long pause. In 1931, the state ordered the site surveyed once more, this time for mineral value. What they uncovered beneath the Harrow House would bring the legend into official record for the first time. When the 1931 surveyors arrived in the valley, they found the Harrow House standing against a wall of overgrowth. Ivy had swallowed the lower windows. Trees had grown up through the old fence. Yet the structure itself was sound, untouched by the years, in a way that drew their attention before anything else did. Inside, the air was dry. Dust clung to the floorboards, but no sign of weathering showed on the walls. The fireplace still held blackened wood. A kettle, rusted but upright, rested on the iron grate. One of the surveyors wrote in his notebook, "Feels as though someone left moments ago." They set their instruments and began marking the foundation. Beneath the main room, they located a void, an underground chamber unrecorded in any map of the property. When they pried open the floor, a wave of warm air escaped, heavy with the scent of oil and earth. Their lanterns revealed a narrow staircase descending into darkness. At the bottom sat a wooden chair. On the chair, a shape covered by a sheet of black cloth. The youngest of the men approached. He touched the cloth. He later said it felt warm. They lifted it away and found a figure seated upright. It was Eliza Harrow. Her skin had darkened, but not decomposed. Her eyes were closed. A band of dried salt circled the floor around the chair. The men fled the house. The county coroner was summoned from Winchester, 50 miles away. He recorded the discovery in his report. Subject exhibits tissue integrity, inconsistent with time of death. No embalming fluid present. Heart cavity intact, but empty. The body was placed in a pine box and taken to the courthouse. Photographs were made, though none were ever released to the public. Within days, rumours spread. Some said the coroner left the building before dawn, pale and shaking, muttering that she had breathed. Others said he burned his clothes before returning home. What can be verified is that he resigned his post the following morning and was never heard from again. The town ordered a second burial. This time, the coffin was sealed with iron nails and encased in lime before being lowered into the ground. A priest was brought in from Chattanooga to bless the grave. He refused to stay the night. Weeks later, a gravedigger named Earl Weller reported sounds coming from the soil, soft thuds, then what he described as a single knock against the inside of the coffin. His statement was laughed off by his employer. Weller left the county 2 days later. His cabin was found empty. No one replaced him. As the months passed, the earth above her grave shifted. The mound settled unevenly, as though hollow underneath. In September, a traveling photographer visited the area and captured an image of the cemetery. The negative, when developed, revealed a faint outline beside her stone. A figure seated, hands folded, face turned toward the camera. The photographer, unaware of the Harrow story, sold the print to a local newspaper. It ran for one day before being recalled. The following week, the editor and his family left Briar Hollow without explanation. The edition containing the photograph was destroyed, but one copy survived in a private collection. On the back, written in pencil, are 4 words: "Her eyes were open." From that point forward, records of the Harrow property cease. The house itself was struck from the county rolls, and the church that once stood beside the cemetery burned to the ground in 1933. No arson report was ever filed. Locals said the fire came from within, that it began at the altar where a single candle had been left lit for the widow's soul. Whether accident or omen, the blaze erased what remained of the town's congregation. By 1940, Briar Hollow existed only as a name on survey maps, yet those who ventured near the valley claimed that some nights, through the trees, a faint orange light could be seen flickering where the church once stood, and on still evenings, when the air was cold enough to still the insects, they said they could hear the creak of a chair moving somewhere in the dark. Long pause. Rain softens. Thunder fades. In 1956, a new discovery would force the case to reopen. A team of builders clearing land for a road unearthed something they could not identify, something that would lead investigators back to the story of Eliza Harrow and the question of how many times one person can be buried. In the autumn of 1956, road surveyors, cutting a new path through the valley, struck a section of hollow ground. Beneath a layer of limestone, they uncovered what appeared to be the corner of a foundation. It was the Harrow house, buried nearly to its roofline, preserved under 40 years of silt and fallen trees. The men did not report it immediately. They worked around the site for 3 days before curiosity overcame instruction. On the 4th morning, 2 of them pried loose the boards that sealed the front doorway and stepped inside. The air was dry, warm. Their flashlights caught motes of dust moving slowly, as if the air itself resisted motion. The first man said it smelled faintly of oil and lilac. The second swore he heard someone exhale. When they returned to camp that night, they refused to sleep inside their trailer. One sat awake by the fire until dawn, staring at the hillside as though expecting movement. Their foreman filed a brief note with the highway department. Structure unsafe. Avoid excavation. But the next week, a federal geologist visited the site to inspect the formation. He entered the house alone. His recorder captured the sound of footsteps, paper, rustling, then a long interval of silence. Near the end of the tape, a single phrase can be heard, faint but clear. It breathes. The tape clicks off a few seconds later. His body was found outside the house the next morning. No sign of struggle. His face calm, his eyes open. The cause of death was listed as heart failure. His assistant, who collected the equipment afterward, reported that the air inside the house seemed to move on its own, as though drawn in and out through unseen lungs. When she returned months later to retrieve additional samples, the structure had collapsed inward. A storm that spring had washed most of the valley away, leaving only fragments of the Harrow foundation visible. The remaining walls were described as warm to the touch, even under rain. Over the next decade, hikers and hunters claimed to hear a steady creaking sound rising from beneath the soil. Some said it followed them through the trees. Others said it grew louder when they stopped moving, as if waiting for their breath to match its rhythm. In 1968, a group of students from the state university entered the valley to conduct a geological survey. Their notes are now part of the public record. One page reads, "Sound inside pit resembles respiration. Duration unknown." Another written hours later, "Night falling. Ground still warm. The team left before sunrise." One of them never returned to campus. The car he had driven was discovered weeks later beside a dirt road near the old church site. Inside, his notebook lay open on the passenger seat. On the final page was a drawing of a chair, and beside it, the words, "She never left." After that year, the valley was declared unstable and removed from state development plans. Fences were raised, signs were posted warning of sinkholes. Yet locals knew the truth, that the ground had begun to move differently. They said it rose and fell at night, slow and shallow, as though the land itself were taking breath. In 1973, a family living on the ridge reported that their walls began to tremble at dusk. Dust sifted from the ceiling beams rhythmically like a pulse. The mother claimed she could hear a woman humming through the vibration. She described the sound as near but unreachable, coming from beneath the floors. A few weeks later, her youngest child was found standing in the doorway before dawn, eyes open, mouth moving as though whispering to someone outside. When asked what he was saying, he answered, "She told me to keep the light." The family moved away within the month. Their house, left empty, collapsed during a windstorm 3 years later. When neighbours searched the wreckage, they found an old chair wedged upright among the beams. Its surface was warm, and carved into the back rail beneath the dust was a name, E. Harrow. Long pause. It was around this time that the recordings began to surface. Tapes left in church basements, in police evidence boxes, in family attics, each one capturing the same low hum, rising and falling like a drawn breath. None of them ran for more than 3 minutes. Each ended with the sound of a chair shifting slightly on wood. Silence. Investigators would later call these environmental anomalies. But those who've listened say that in the final seconds of one tape, if you turn the volume high enough, you can hear a voice. A woman's voice. She says, "Open the door." In 1978, a small wooden box was found in the archives of the defunct Bryan County Courthouse. It had no label, only a paper tag tied with a string. The handwriting was faded, but 2 words could still be read, "For return." Inside were 6 wax cylinders, the kind used for phonographs in the late 19th century, along with a small, folded note. The note read simply, "Harrows, for record, do not play." There was no signature. The cylinders were sent to the State University for preservation. 5 were blank or too damaged to recover. The 6th contained a sound unlike anything the technicians expected. It began with a faint crackle of static. Then, underneath the noise, a tone. Slow, melodic, steady as breathing. At first, it resembled the hum of air moving through a pipe. Then clearly, a voice. A woman's. She was humming a tune. The melody followed no known hymn or folk song, yet it carried the cadence of a lullaby. The pattern repeated every 17 seconds. Technicians listened for 4 minutes before one of them stopped the playback. He said the sound had changed. He said he could hear words forming beneath the hum, not loud enough to understand, but there, pressed between the cracks of the cylinder's grooves. The analysis team made a transfer copy and archived the original under restricted access. Later that year, a graduate student reviewing the recording discovered that the melody matched a funeral composition written by Reverend Milton Cale in 1885, 2 years after Eliza Harrow's death. The hymn's title, Rest for the Unrested. Cale's diary, preserved in the same collection, includes a brief entry dated the week before he wrote it. A woman visited, dressed in mourning, face pale as linen, said her name was Eliza. No record of a parishioner by that name exists in his register. When researchers slowed the wax cylinder recording, they found something else hidden beneath the main track. A faint repetition of the same melody, offset by less than a second, as if two voices were captured at once, one high, one low. The tones intertwined, forming a subtle echo that rose and fell like two lungs sharing breath. When reversed, the pattern produced an unmistakable phrase. He waits. It was unclear whether the phrase referred to her husband or something else. The recording was played only twice more under supervision. Both times, the playback machine stopped without explanation, exactly 4 minutes and 19 seconds in. The same length each time. Listeners described a growing sense of pressure, as if the air around them thickened. One wrote, "It felt like standing too close to a whisper." After the final test, the copy was sealed. The original cylinder disappeared from the archives within a year. Decades later, an amateur collector claimed to have purchased a wax cylinder marked Harrow from a Nashville estate sale. He played it once. His wife reported that he sat still through the entire recording, not moving even when the cylinder ended. When she touched his shoulder, she found him staring at the phonograph horn as if waiting for it to speak again. He remained in that state for 3 days, neither eating nor sleeping. When he finally spoke, he said only, "She knows the tune now." The cylinder was never recovered. Brief pause. A faint hum returns, quieter than before. Over the next few years, reports of a woman's voice singing through the static of radio transmissions increased across the region. Fishermen on the Tennessee River said they heard a lullaby drifting through their radios even when the power was off. Truckers driving the mountain roads at night claimed their CB sets picked up a female voice humming at the edge of reception, soft, constant, until the engine died. The melody, when compared across recordings, matched the wax cylinder exactly, note for note. Engineers found no source of interference. They noted, however, that the signals always aligned with the valley where Briar Hollow once stood. Long silence. The hum fades out slowly. In the spring of 1982, a private investigator named William Clay began gathering these reports into a single case file. What he discovered would lead to the most disturbing evidence yet. Records written not by witnesses, but by someone who claimed to have known the widow herself. In 1982, William Clay, a private investigator and former field reporter, began compiling what he called the Harrow Record. His notes, found years later among the contents of an abandoned motel room, fill 3 leather binders. Each page contains an account. Statements, interviews, fragments of letters, all from people claiming to have encountered the widow or something tied to her name. The earliest comes from 1912, the latest, dated 1981, from a family living 50 miles from the old Briar Hollow site. Clay's handwriting is neat, the tone objective, but as the entries progress, his script begins to tilt, his sentences shorten, as if he'd begun writing faster than he could think. The first interview reads, "Subject, female, age 87, claims to have seen a woman in black on Ridge Road in 1907, states that the woman sang a tune she couldn't get rid of. Subject still remembers melody after 75 years. Clay notes that when he asked her to hum the song, her pitch matched the cylinder recording discovered in 1978. The second entry, subject, male, age 43, descendant of Undertaker Thomas Riggs, reports family tradition of keeping lamp burning on anniversary of Harrow's burial, says his father told him, if the flame goes out, she calls the name. When Clay asked what that meant, the man said he didn't know. He then refused to continue the interview, insisting that he had already said too much. That night, the man's home caught fire. Investigators later found no cause for ignition. Clay's next notes grow erratic. He begins to write about hearing a woman's voice through his cassette recorder even when it wasn't running. The audio technician who examined his tapes reported faint overlapping frequencies, something like two people breathing at once. Pause, faint click of a tape spool turning. On October 9, 1982, Clay interviewed a descendant of Sheriff Jacob Oakes, the man who first documented the Harrow lights in 1883. The descendant, Thomas Oakes, brought an object wrapped in cloth. When Clay unwrapped it, he found a tarnished ring, a woman's silver initials engraved inside the band, E.H. Oakes claimed it had appeared in his grandmother's sewing drawer without explanation 2 years earlier. Clay photographed the ring and returned it. According to the case file, the photograph developed normally, but within days, the image began to change. The background darkened. The ring's reflection grew brighter until it appeared to emit its own light. The negative, examined later under magnification, showed faint markings along the band, not visible in the print. Tiny letters forming a sentence. The inscription read, "Keep the flame." Soft hum builds under the voice. Clay continued his investigation for another 6 months. His final entry, labeled simply Interview 17, was never transcribed. Only the tape remains. On it, a woman's voice answers questions calmly for several minutes. Her tone is quiet, composed. Clay's own voice asks, "How long have you known the song?" There is a pause. The woman replies, "Since before the ground closed." He asks, "And you are Eliza Harrow?" Another pause. Then softly, "Not anymore." The recording ends with the sound of a door opening and a breath drawn close to the microphone. Clay's notes stop after that date. His car was found 3 days later on an access road outside the valley, keys still in the ignition, driver's door open. In the passenger seat lay his tape recorder. The cassette inside was blank. Silence. During the months that followed, small objects began to surface in mailboxes around the county. Wedding bands, fragments of lace, and in one case a small music box that played a familiar melody when wound. The return address on each envelope was the same, Briar Hollow, Tennessee, but the postmark bore no date. Faint, mechanical whir, like a music box winding down. Decades later, investigators excavating the region in search of historical artifacts found that the valley had begun to collapse inward again. Beneath the soil, instruments detected pockets of air, hollow spaces that expanded and contracted in intervals steady as breath. One chamber, larger than the rest, gave off a consistent warmth. When the lead surveyor placed a hand to the ground above it, he described feeling the faintest pulse. He withdrew his hand, stood, and said, "It's waiting." Silence. Distant hum resumes, faint, low, almost human. In 1931, men found a body sitting upright in a chair. 50 years later, The earth itself seemed to have taken that same position. What the valley held beneath was no longer called legend. It had become pattern, movement, breath, rhythm, recurring with time. Pause. That rhythm would draw new investigators in the years ahead. They would dig again, and in doing so, they would find proof that the widow's story had never ended. In the spring of 1996, a state-funded archaeological team returned to the valley. Officially, their objective was environmental. The terrain was unstable, prone to landslides, and had begun swallowing the remnants of the old highway. Unofficially, several members had requested the assignment for a different reason. They'd read Clay's notes. The excavation began at dawn. 6 personnel, 1 camera operator, and a local guide who refused to stay past nightfall. Soil samples taken near the center of the site showed unusually high temperatures, consistent with geothermal activity, except there were no fault lines in the region. Beneath that layer, they struck what appeared to be compacted wood, charred boards forming a square outline, the remnants of a structure buried deep below. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Laurel Danner, noted in her field journal, "House foundation feels intact, we're close." 2 days later, the first chamber opened. It was narrow, walled with aged brick, and entirely dry. On the floor lay fragments of fabric, a rusted oil lamp, and half buried in silt, a chair leg. The rest of the chair appeared to have been consumed by time, except for the seat, which was still whole. The wood there was darker, smoother, polished as if by years of use. Danner's notes read, "Surface warm, not damp. Temperature 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Low hum enters. Faint vibration in the background." The team descended farther. Beneath the chamber they found a second layer, a hollow pocket surrounded by compact clay, large enough for several people to stand. In the center, embedded in the earth, was a ring of salt. Inside that ring, the soil had hardened into a smooth basin, shaped as if something once rested there. When a technician brushed the dust away, he found traces of linen fiber woven together, too new to be 19th century. He placed the sample in a containment bag. Hours later, the fibers were gone. The bag held only fine grey ash. Pause. Hum deepens, a slow, rhythmic pulse under the narration. That evening, the crew set up floodlights to photograph the site. At 2:47 a.m., the cameras recorded movement, small, circular depressions forming in the dirt, as if the ground inhaled. Each depression expanded, paused, then lifted back, exhaling dust. The pattern repeated every 23 seconds. Danner's voice, caught on audio, can be heard whispering, "It's breathing again." Minutes later, all power failed. The backup generators, still sealed and full, refused to start. The last footage from that night shows the excavation pit lit only by headlamps. One worker kneels near the center of the basin, brushing away soil. Behind him, another light flickers, momentarily illuminating what appears to be a handprint pressed into the clay wall. But when the light steadies, the wall is smooth again. Soft scraping sound, barely audible. At dawn, the team regrouped. One technician was missing. His equipment remained where he'd been working. His helmet lay in the center of the basin, cracked but clean. The rest of the site was untouched. Danner wrote, "No signs of struggle. The earth simply closed. Excavation was suspended. The valley was resealed within a week." Months later, when Danner returned to catalogue her findings, she found that all magnetic tapes from the dig had degraded into silence. Only one file survived, a short clip from the final night. The audio begins with wind, then faintly, the creak of wood, rhythmic, like a chair moving. After 20 seconds, a voice, female, whispering close enough to distort the microphone. You kept the flame. Silence. The clip ends abruptly. Dana left the project and never returned to academia. In her last recorded interview, she said only this: "We didn't find her. We uncovered what she left behind." Pause. Faint wind returns, rustling papers. The site remains sealed today. But locals say that when the ground thaws in spring, heat rises from the hollow like breath from a sleeping body. Some nights, they claim, a faint hum can be heard beneath the soil. Steady, patient, almost like a song waiting to begin again. By the early 2000s, Briar Hollow was little more than a name on a map. The valley had been cordoned off, yet the legend persisted. Local residents spoke of lights appearing on moonless nights. They said the illumination came from no visible source, pale, white, hovering just above the ground, shifting in patterns too deliberate to be fireflies. Some called it the widow's light. In 2003, an amateur photographer named Erin Collins set up a camera trap near the old highway. She wanted to capture wildlife. Instead, her footage recorded something else. At precisely 3:02 a.m., a soft glow emerged from the valley floor. It pulsed like breath, expanding and contracting over 25 seconds, then pausing, then resuming. Collins watched in disbelief as the light formed a vague human silhouette. It tilted its head slowly, as if observing her. From the shadows, then it disappeared. She later described feeling a presence, not aggressive, not angry, but patient, waiting. Pause. Faint crackle continues like distant static. Later that year, an electrical engineer named Mark Jensen investigated the same area. He set up instruments to measure electromagnetic fields. Readings fluctuated violently, even when devices were powered off. Jensen noted in his field report, "The anomaly behaves as if aware of the instruments. Every attempt to isolate the source fails. Fields rise when approached, then diminish when left." On his third night, his equipment recorded a low-frequency hum, steady, almost melodic. When he slowed the playback, it matched the melody documented in Clay's Harrow record, note for note. Jensen's notes end abruptly. The melody is in the air, in the ground, the page is torn. Sound, faint scraping of metal across wood, then silence. Witnesses over the next decade reported similar phenomena. Truckers along the mountain road saw lights hovering above the asphalt. Their CB radios occasionally emitted whispers, female, calm, repeating a song. Residents living near the valley swore their smoke detectors and radios would turn on at exactly 3:02 a.m. Electrical engineers could find no fault. Phones left on the porch would ring with no incoming call. When answered, the faint hum of a lullaby filled the line. One farmer reported that his entire herd gathered near the valley at night, staring at the ground, refusing to move. When asked why, he said, "It's like they hear her calling." Long pause. Faint hum rises slightly, then fades. Even in the daylight, some reported seeing shadows flit across the trees where no branches existed. Children claimed to see a woman in black watching them, always at a distance, silent. And always, when night fell, the glow returned. Collins returned to the valley one spring evening in 2010. She placed a candle at the edge of the hollow, thinking she might finally see the source. She remembered Clay's warning in his notes, "Keep the flame." As the flame flickered, a soft wind brushed her face. From the hollow, a glow rose, tall, human-shaped, stretching skyward. Collins whispered, "Are you her?" The light pulsed once in response. Then it vanished. By morning the candle had not burned down, its wick pristine, no wax melted. Silence. A faint single note hums, then dies out. The valley remains quiet most days, but the phenomena never fully disappear. Every few years, new reports arrive. Lights, sounds, recordings that match the original Harrow melody. Some scientists insist it's atmospheric interference. Others say the valley has a memory, an imprint of something that refuses to leave. And some who study the recordings note the same pattern emerging in every instance: the pulse of the valley, the echo of a voice, the insistence of a flame that will not go out. By 2015, Briar Hollow had settled into a strange rhythm. The valley appeared empty. Roads were overgrown, cabins decayed, and the old highway closed to traffic. Yet the shadows remained. Local residents described figures standing among the trees, motionless, watching. They were rarely human in shape, elongated or slightly off balance. One man, a retired forest ranger named Henry Klein, recalled the first time he saw one. He had been checking a boundary marker in late autumn. A tall, dark figure stood at the crest of a hill, staring down the slope. Klein froze. His instincts told him to retreat. Yet he could not move. When he blinked, the figure had vanished. A faint melody, soft and distorted, lingered in the air. Pause. Faint wind with irregular pulses. That melody, he later discovered, matched the song recorded in Clay's Harrow record, in Jensen's 2003 tape, and in Erin Collins's footage. Shadows were not limited to human witnesses. Animals behaved strangely. Dogs refused to cross certain paths. Birds would circle overhead, avoiding the valley floor. Cows congregated at the edges, silent, attentive. In 2017, a team of paranormal researchers entered the hollow. Their objective was scientific. Cameras, EMF detectors, thermal scanners. Within minutes, the temperature in the hollow began to rise sharply, unaccountably, unevenly, as if a localized heat source pulsed beneath the earth. Instruments recorded vibrations, small, steady, rhythmic. Every pulse was measured, consistent, almost intentional. The researchers split into pairs to investigate. One pair reported seeing a faint, black silhouette near an overturned tree. It moved against the wind, slow and deliberate, vanishing when approached. Another team discovered footprints, small, narrow, perfectly preserved in soft soil. Yet when they measured the spacing, the prints were taller than any human, longer than any known animal. Soft, low hum begins underneath narration, steady like a heartbeat. That night, a researcher's thermal camera recorded a figure seated on the valley floor, legs crossed, arms folded. It appeared to study them. The figure vanished when a flashlight passed over it. Instruments went haywire. EMF spikes, magnetic disturbances, digital cameras spontaneously deleting files. One recorder captured a whisper, "Do you remember the flame?" Another whispered, seconds later, "Keep it lit." By dawn, the team had vacated the hollow. Equipment malfunctioned permanently. Notes were lost. Only scattered photographs remained. Yet the melody persisted in the soil, in the air, in the wind. Outsiders drawn by curiosity or obsession would continue to visit. All who linger too long report the same sensation: being watched, followed by shadows, hearing the song, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath their feet, and always the light returns at night. Pause. Faint hum fades into distant wind. Irregular breaths, like air moving through a tunnel. Briar Hollow had become a place not entirely of this world, a threshold between past and present, between memory and something that refuses to die. Each shadow, each light, each breath of air carries the story of the widow, the remnants of a life interrupted, a death delayed. Some say she remains because she must. Others say the valley remembers her, and she is its voice. Long pause, faint heartbeat hum returns, and as the sun rises, the hollow sleeps, but only until nightfall. By the late 2010s, Briar Hollow's reach seemed to stretch beyond its boundaries. Strange events began appearing in towns miles from the valley. Residents reported hearing whispers, soft and melodic, at times when no one else was around. The same lullaby, the same haunting pulse recorded decades earlier, now echoing across streets and alleyways. In 2018, a delivery driver in Nashville described his experience. He was parked outside a warehouse taking inventory on a quiet night. His radio, off, unplugged, began playing a distorted melody. When he reached for the dial, the music stopped. Then a voice whispered clearly through the static, "You found the flame." Terrified, he fled. Later, police records indicate no known disturbances or broadcast interference in the area. Pause. Faint hum, rhythmic, underlying the narration. A sound engineer in Memphis, reviewing recordings for a local podcast, noticed an anomaly. Embedded beneath city sounds, cars, footsteps, distant sirens, was the same low-frequency pulse. It matched precisely the recordings from Aaron Collins's camera trap at the valley. Urban legends began to spread. Whispers from empty buildings, lights hovering over vacant lots, shadows flitting at the edges of vision. None of it could be explained by technology, weather, or human intervention. By 2019, the phenomena caught the attention of researchers in multiple disciplines: physics, psychology, anthropology. Each investigation shared one strange result. No matter the city or distance from Briar Hollow, the pulse and the melody remained consistent. They began to hypothesize that the valley itself, or the presence within it, had created a resonance, a lingering memory transmitted through the environment. Soft tapping, irregular, like footsteps on gravel. In one documented case, a young woman in Knoxville recorded herself speaking to her cat. When reviewing the footage later, she noticed a shadowy figure standing behind her sofa. Tall, still, impossible to place in three-dimensional space. On the audio track, the lullaby played softly in reverse. She claimed she did not hear it at the time. Attempts to replicate the phenomenon failed. Another case involved a local school. One night, the security system recorded lights flickering in the gymnasium. On the infrared camera, a figure moved across the floor, human in form, but impossible in motion. It paused, turned, and appeared to stare directly into the camera before vanishing. When staff reviewed the footage, they noticed that the temperature in the gym had risen 20 degrees in less than 5 minutes. Pause. Faint heartbeat hum returns, almost synchronized with breathing. Across all reports, one question persisted. Why did this presence extend so far beyond its origin? And why did it always return to the same symbols? The flame? The lullaby? The pulse beneath the earth? Some theorized it was the widow herself, lingering, moving, watching. Others argued it was the valley speaking through her memory, an echo of a life interrupted and a death postponed. But all who encountered the phenomenon shared one undeniable truth. There is something patient, precise, and inexorably aware, something that waits, observes, and ensures the flame is never forgotten. By the early 2020s, Briar Hollow had developed a reputation among those sensitive to the unseen. Paranormal investigators, folklorists, and even curious hikers reported experiences that defied explanation. In 2021, a small team of researchers set up camp on the edge of the valley, determined to document the presence directly. They installed motion sensitive cameras, infrared sensors, and multiple audio recorders. On the first night, the valley was quiet. The second night, one of the cameras recorded movement, a shadow, thin and elongated, gliding across the slope with impossible speed. It did not touch the ground. It did not cast a reflection. When the researchers approached, the area registered temperatures far above normal, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. One of them, Dr. Leah Moreno, recorded in her journal, "It watches, but it does not flee. It allows you to be seen while remaining unseen. It is patient, deliberate, precise, not human, yet aware." Pause. Soft scraping sound, like metal across stone, faint but distinct. That same night, audio recorders picked up the lullaby, clear, repeating every 23 seconds, despite the absence of any wind or identifiable source. A handheld thermal camera revealed a shape in the distance. Human in silhouette, seated on what appeared to be a low mound of earth. The figure rose slowly, turned toward the cameras, then vanished into thin air. Witnesses reported a feeling of being followed even after leaving the site. Cars stalled on the highway miles away, radios turned on, playing fragments of the lullaby. Footsteps could be heard in empty rooms. In one chilling case, a researcher awoke to find a handprint pressed into the frost on her window. Too large for her own hand, yet perfectly human in proportion. Days later, the print had vanished without trace. Long pause. Heartbeat-like hum rises, irregular, almost like breathing in rhythm with the narration. The presence, whatever it was, did not appear malicious. It was meticulous, intentional, observing rules of its own design. Historical records suggested this had always been the case. Accounts from the 1880s describe the widow, Eliza Harrow, in ways consistent with these modern encounters. Always present, always watching, never aggressive, yet leaving marks of her existence. Disturbances, sounds, lights, impressions of movement. Some speculate that her death was delayed, suspended somehow, leaving her consciousness or essence bound to the valley. Others argue the valley itself has absorbed her presence, acting as a vessel, echoing her life in the environment. Faint whisper, barely audible. Keep the flame. All modern encounters share the same symbols: the pulse, the lullaby, the glow, and the insistence of observation. Those who linger too long often report an intense pressure, a weight in the air, a certainty that something watches just beyond perception. And as night falls, the valley waits, patient, silent, watching. Night in Briar Hollow is not silent. It carries memory, pulse, and the faint glow of something that refuses to vanish. For over a century, the widow's presence has lingered. Not violent, not cruel, but unwavering. Locals remember the stories: a woman in black, a candle that never dies, a melody whispered in the wind. Modern accounts confirm it. Erin Collins' camera trap recorded the glow. Mark Jensen's instruments captured the pulse. Urban witnesses hear the lullaby in empty streets. Every encounter carries the same insistence: the flame must remain lit. In 2022, a historian and a small team of documentarians returned to the Hollow. Their goal? To understand, to witness, to preserve evidence. They brought with them a single candle, lit from a flame passed down from Erin Collins's original recording site. As darkness fell, the candle flickered. Slowly, a glow began to rise from the valley floor. Shadows stretched along the trees. The pulse returned, steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. In the distance, the figure appeared, tall, black, seated upon the earth, head tilted. It rose, slowly. The flame in the researcher's hands did not falter. And then, for the first time in recorded history, it seemed to respond. The glow from the hollow formed shapes, faint, delicate, human. Whispers carried over the wind, repeating, "Keep it lit. Keep it alive." One researcher, trembling, recorded, "It's not trying to hurt us. It's guiding, watching, waiting. The flame, it connects us." Objects around them shifted imperceptibly, aligning toward the light. Cameras malfunctioned. Batteries drained, yet the glow remained. And then the melody, the lullaby, filled the air. Soft, distorted, repeated endlessly, embedding itself in consciousness. The candle flame grew taller, brighter, as though fed by the presence itself. Shadows on the tree line began to move in patterns, forming fleeting shapes of a woman, always observing, always there. By dawn the glow receded, the melody faded, but the candle, small, fragile, still burned, its flame intact. No wax melted, no wick shortened. Researchers left the valley in silence. They knew the flame was not theirs. It never had been. The valley waits, the presence endures, and somewhere, beyond perception, the widow remains, watching, waiting, ensuring the flame never dies. For more than a century, Briar Hollow has held a secret, a presence, patient, deliberate, and unseen. The widow, Eliza Harrow, whose death was recorded but never completed, whose life ended yet somehow endured. Accounts across decades, from townsfolk to scientists, from explorers to urban witnesses, all describe the same phenomena: the pulse beneath the earth, the lullaby in the wind, the glow that refuses to die. And now, in the present day, the pieces align. Researchers returning to the hollow found the remnants of a life interrupted. Old journals, diaries, letters, photographs, all pointing to one truth she had never left. She waits in the spaces between memory and reality, between light and shadow. In the deepest part of the valley, where the trees thin and the mist gathers, her presence manifests fully, not as a ghostly figure, not as a fleeting shadow, but as something older, wiser, and impossibly patient. One evening, a lone investigator approached the heart of the hollow. The wind stopped. Even the nocturnal creatures fell silent. A faint light glimmered on the forest floor. He knelt to examine it. The candle burned. No smoke, no flicker, but light, pure and steady. Then he saw her. A figure seated upon the ground, features indistinct yet unmistakably human. She rose slowly, walked without sound, and stopped just beyond reach. And then, in a voice barely louder than the wind, she spoke. "The flame is alive because I am. As long as it burns, I remain, and so does the hollow." Instruments failed. Cameras recorded nothing. Only the investigator's memory preserved the encounter. That night he could not sleep. In dreams he heard the lullaby. In shadows he felt the pulse. In every quiet place he sensed her watching. Briar Hollow is no longer just a valley. It is a threshold, a boundary, a space where the living and something beyond coexist. And the widow never died. Paul's faint heartbeat hum grows, then fades to silence. She waits, patient, eternal, watching the flame, watching us. And when you walk alone in the quiet of night, ask yourself this: do you hear the lullaby? And if you do, what will you do when the flame calls to you?